Would like to welcome you to the BlackUSA.News morning show. My name is Donnie Glover, and I'll be your host today. We're joined by attorney Neil Dubowski. Good morning, Neil. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Donnie. Good. How are you?
I'm not good, Neil. It took everything in me not to call the mayor, the governor, the supreme ruler of the universe, because what I'm seeing here in the city of Baltimore is simply unacceptable. When I think of the vacant houses, the addicts that repeatedly go in there, the fires that happen, the break-ins that happen, all low-level crimes, and I don't really give a rat's bottom about any elected officials' feelings at this point. The city of Baltimore is off the freaking chain. So, Neil, you know anything about vacant houses?
That's a very. When you say, do you know anything about vacant houses? You mean from a governmental housing perspective, like who's responsible for that? Um, a lot of times I think it's landlord responsibility if they're not government owned.
Okay. And the landlord you ain't seen in 15 years.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, doesn't Donald Trump's son-in-law own some land here in Baltimore?
I can't put this on Trump. A lot of other people own these properties. And what I'm trying to say to you, like here in my block, it is a constant battle to chase addicts out, to stop fires, to stop break-ins, to keep them out your alley. It's like homeowners in the inner city are inundated with a barrage of attacks from people who don't even live here. How do you take a property from a landlord who's clearly negligent? The fire department has been to this property repeatedly. The city has boarded up these properties repeatedly. At what point do you just take the house?
I mean, I think there's a legal process you would go through, but I think you're skipping a step. I think you're jumping to a solution and assuming that governmental officials are looking for solutions. I'm more cynical even than that. I think,
I
unfortunately,
don't think they're looking for
they're
solutions.
not. They're looking for somebody to blame for a problem, not looking to fix it.
I just want to fix the problem.
Yeah,
I
I
went
know
to
you.
Poly,
I know
two
you
years
want to
of
fix the
Poly,
problem.
and that's what we learned: problem solving.
Yeah, I mean, politics used to be about problem solving, and it's just not anymore. I wish it was. I wish it was still the focus of what people did, but people aren't interested in solving problems. They're interested in identifying problems and then glorifying them and then blaming somebody else for them.
The city of Baltimore, last week, all in the news, there's this discussion over whether or not the attorney is prosecuting low-level crime. Her philosophy, from my understanding, is that the focus should be more on violent criminals. This is what I know. In West Baltimore, we just want to be able to go to the store and come back without being shot or being asked to buy crack, dope, coke by people who are often peddling in earshot of the police. That's all we want. We don't want a lot of discussion. We don't want a lot of back and forth, finger pointing. We just want a nicer city. And apparently, the people who are in here from the top to the bottom can't deliver. And they're all Democrats. So hold on, let me bring them up to speed. Mr. Dashiell, rhetorical question. How do we get rid of these vacants that repeatedly cause break-ins, fires, and the like? We have a number of vacants. We've done the 311. We've called housing. We've called code enforcement. We've called the mayor. But instead, I'm greeted yesterday with a little white guy who doesn't live in this house coming out the front door like he's paid mortgages for years, when in fact he was just shooting dope. Who's going to fix my problem? Or if I pick up a bat, Mr. Dashiell, and lightly press it against his forehead. Why should I go to central booking? The government isn't doing anything. The police aren't doing anything. As a matter of fact, if you come to Pennsylvania Avenue, you'll see cops and you'll see people doing all kinds of things. As long as you don't shoot anybody, you're good. How long are we going to keep taking the excuses? It's not working, Mr. Dashiell. And the people who say they can do the job apparently cannot.
Well, good morning, Neil. Good morning, Donnie. Let me say first,
Morning.
with respect to the use of the baseball bat, I recommend the throat and the kneecaps. I think that those are the two places where you're likely to get the kind of response that you're looking for. With respect to the vacant housing, government created the problem in largely two ways. First of all, it's a systemic problem going all the way back to the creation of the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the 40s. But in Baltimore City particularly, it created the problem in two ways. Number one, the city has become way too developer-oriented rather than consumer-oriented as it relates to housing, the dealing with the housing issue. Number two, the government spent way too much money and focused way too much on using the available federal money for demolition rather than rehabilitation and reconstruction. And this goes all the way back, frankly, to the Smoke administration when Dan Henson was
He was running both housing authority and Department of Housing.
and that's right. The money, the typically, even back then, it cost about $20,000 on average to demolish a row house. It would have cost maybe about twice that much, maybe 150% of that to actually rehabilitate the house and make it livable. Here's the deal. The corner phrase. In most cases, the people most likely to want to live in the neighborhood are the people who already live in the neighborhood or who came from the neighborhood. So the focus should have, rather than tearing down the house, the focus should have been on making the house habitable for people that want to live in it. Then you focus on what do those people need to be able to live in the house. The goal, from developer point of view, the answer has always been something to make the house, quote, affordable, without addressing the income or needs of the occupant. So you don't have to make the house affordable. I mean, by imposing some sort of restriction on what you can rent it or sell it for, if in fact you empower people to be able to buy it by increasing their income and employment opportunities. So the answer to the question ultimately, Donnie, in my opinion, is the lack of resources within the community. But the government in the ways that I indicated largely have to create the problem. Now, in the short term, you may have to use your baseball bat more than what you would like and deal with the consequences. But also remember, tearing down the house. Every time you tear down a house, you tear down the opportunity to recreate the community that existed before the house was destroyed.
I don't know that community's coming back. This house has been.
It will come back with sufficient, because all the pieces are there to force the community to want to come back. But the government is running two programs at once. The government is still operating as though the suburbs are the main attraction for everybody, black and white. And at the same time, they're trying to attract new people to come back into the city, which are primarily white. Those are not the people who came from those communities. We don't have a program that's focused on keeping black folk in the communities or attracting black folk back to the communities that they came from. That's what's missing, in my opinion.
Neil?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack here, right? You know, Baltimore City reminds me a little bit of the child that's stuck in a very messy divorce situation where the parents are using that child as a pawn to try and one up the other. You have local and state officials, and this has been going on for decades now, basically using Baltimore City as a political football instead of actually doing what needs to be done to remedy a situation. So what ends up happening is they all do it to score political points, and nobody actually does anything to fix the underlying root problems in the city. And so while they're going back and forth telling everybody how bad the other one is, Baltimore City keeps getting worse because nobody's actually fixing the problem.
Do you have that problem in Baltimore County?
Yes. I mean, the problem, Baltimore County largely ignored it over the years by refusing to allow the development of subsidized housing. Except in in the last 10 years, there was a time when you couldn't put Section 8 housing anywhere in Baltimore County. But the real problem is most people are born, live, and die in exactly the same place or within a few miles of the same place. So people don't. This idea of mobility is novel and new and still not really accurate. Most people want to live, if they can, exactly where they were born and raised. So the goal is to make sure that community is maintained in a way that will allow them to do that.
Well, let me put it differently.
Yeah.
How come Sandtown doesn't get the same attention as Guilford or Bolton Hill?
Look at the median income.
So it's about money. We don't make enough money.
Absolutely. That's what I've been saying all along. I've been saying all along. If the answer to the problem is from the city's point of view is to give the subsidy to a developer so that the developer can produce, quote, affordable housing. The real answer is to give people to increase their wages and income so that they can afford to live wherever the hell they want.
So yeah, I said that's right. And actually, Donnie, this kind of brings your 2 points together because you were talking about the housing, and you also mentioned earlier something about this proclamation, for lack of a better word, that we're not going to prosecute quote unquote low level crime. That the city's going to focus on major crime. The problem is that the lifeblood of any community is the small businesses within that community. That's no different in Baltimore City than it is anywhere else. And the problem is, if you make an announcement, if you basically tell the community that you're not going to prosecute low-level crime, you provide an incentive for people to commit property crimes, and that directly affects small businesses and local communities, in a very, very impactful way financially, which then leads to all sorts of other residual effects. Right, it's dominoes. You have to prosecute those crimes in order to ensure that small businesses can operate in a way that's viable, which then allows those businesses to grow, to hire more people. That's how you build communities. You build it from the bottom up, not the top down.
I've listened to you guys we're coming into a year now. December 1st will be a year of streaming. And we've talked about these issues over and over, but nothing's changing.
Yeah, it has gotten worse.
So if you guys are so smart, maybe you should be in office.
Well, you may have been a little bit intending to be a little bit facetious in that remark, but ultimately you've touched upon a very significant problem. The problem is we don't promote the right people to seek these offices. With the point, the fact is that, as I often say, the only decision is who decides. That's the most important decision there is in the universe of mankind, in the human genome. The only question is who decides. Our problem is generally, and this is not one that's restricted to the Black community, generally, the decision about who to promote and who to elect and elect to office is one of the poorest decisions that we make in this country.
Mr. Bob, I wasn't going to say anything, but I heard Sheila Dixon during an interview recently on this network say that the numbers were, I essentially heard her say that she did not win that second election, the most recent one for mayor.
Well, based upon the vote count, she didn't.
I always sensed that there was some hanky-panky, just like there was 4 years prior.
Well, Donnie, my suspicion is only because, and it's only because I've been around for a good little while. My suspicion is there's some quote hanky panky in every election. The only question is you got to manage it, just like everything else. It's got to be manageable to the point where we at least
You're not going to tell me on your best day that Brandon Scott beat Sheila. I ain't buying it ever. You can't tell me. You cannot convince me that he did the type of convincing of seniors, particularly women, especially when that young man punched him in his mouth. Because I know a lot of black women that did not look kindly upon that. You're not going to tell me.
Can I turn that around on you for a second, Donnie?
No. Come on, Mr. Bob.
Go ahead, Neil. I yield to the gentleman.
Are you suggesting that Brandon Scott, a 36-year-old with negligible roots and connections to the community, was in a better position to facilitate a fraudulent outcome of the election than Sheila Dixon?
She was robbed the first time. Are you aware of the 2016 election?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm asking, do you think Brandon Scott...
Are you aware there were 1,800 voting irregularities in that election compared to 200 to 300 in the other 23 jurisdictions combined? And so you're then aware that the same people in charge of that election were in charge of 2020. So yes, I think it had nothing to do with Brandon. It had more to do with the political machine, the counting of votes, and so on and so forth. No, I do not believe he could beat her, or he led in no polls. Let's say, okay, so he did win. How long can you watch the local news, right, Neil?
I do.
Have you heard the mayor come on and answer questions for Channel 45?
No.
Or I heard part of it. I've heard him answer some questions.
Well, he comes on every day and he says, we know.
Right.
But apparently somebody does not know because nothing's changing.
Well, Donnie, we are responsible for the fact that the election was close enough such that shenanigans would have been successful. And that's what I'm. Yes, you are. We are you. Everybody who's eligible to vote in the city in both the last time and 2016 is responsible for the outcome. You are.
I'm not.
We got to take responsibility of the things that we control. Everybody makes a personal decision whether they're going to vote or not vote. Our problem is we don't do enough to educate our own people about who they should vote for.
I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble for saying this with you, Donnie.
Yeah.
I this idea that we can just say that election outcomes are fraudulent based on a feeling or a sense is a very dangerous thing to do, because what it does is it actually has, I think, sometimes the opposite effect of what we intend. If you tell a community that irrespective of whether or not they vote, the outcome is sort of predetermined by the powers that be, you are not going to increase turnout. You are going to decrease it.
Okay. Are you familiar with Mobtown, Neil?
Yeah, sure.
You know that Baltimore's referred to historically as Mobtown?
Yeah.
It's always been uncouth here.
Yeah, I understand that.
This is nothing new. Let me ask you this, Neil. Are you familiar with Mayor J. Barry Mahol?
No.
He was the mayor around 1904, 1907. He's better known as the father of segregation. You're in the home. You think you come from South Africa, home of apartheid? Welcome to Baltimore, the home of segregation.
Oh, sure.
So the policies established here were replicated around the country. Whites couldn't move into black neighborhoods. Blacks couldn't move into white neighborhoods. We couldn't move into white neighborhoods, but whites couldn't move into black neighborhoods. Is that true, Mr. Dashiell?
Of course it is. We've never had to worry about excluding anybody because everything about the culture suggested that you were supposed to be somewhere other than where we were, whether you were black or white.
I don't know about you, Neil, but when I see 1,800 voting irregularities, an election that was decertified, something to my knowledge that's unprecedented, no, I don't trust anything that Armstead Jones, the head of elections, is in charge of. No, I don't.
But
go ahead, Neil.
You're both right about your fundamental points, right? So let's accept
if you stole from me last year, what makes me think you won't steal this year?
Hang on a second, because I hear your point, but you're both right. Baltimore City is a disaster, right? And it's a disaster that needs to be fixed. We all agree on that. And we all agree with Bob's point as well, which is that the way to fix it is for people to come out and vote for different people, for people who can actually make a difference. Well, if you put those two together, how do you incentivize people who haven't otherwise participated to participate, to feel like they're going to actually make a difference? You don't do it by telling them that their votes don't matter.
No, I said their votes weren't counted.
It deflates turnout.
And whose fault is that? I wasn't the one that wasn't counting votes. That 1,800, let me tell you, ex-offenders were a big group in that. And mind you, seniors standing in line for 2 hours in the middle of COVID, that was a deterrent. You remember the challenges, Bob?
Donnie, when are you going to run?
Smart people don't run for office.
That's the problem.
That is the problem.
That's the problem.
I strive to be smart. There's nothing.
Look, nature abhors a vacuum. So if the smart people don't take up the space, who's left?
Everybody else.
Everybody else.
I'm a businessman. It doesn't.
That's right. It's exactly right.
It doesn't make sense to go out there and risk so much, and for a most unappreciated position.
Well, you've got to look at why you're running. I mean, I lost.
They all say the same thing.
I lost in 1998 because I ran for the wrong reason. I raised more money than the incumbent. I had more recognition than the incumbent. I knocked on more doors than the incumbent. I lost because I ran just to put something else on my resume. It didn't run for the purpose of really helping the people. And God has a way of straightening that out. So I lost. I lost 2-1 to Dolores Kelly in the 10th legislative district in a run for Senate in 1998. I lost 2-1. I raised more money than the incumbent, which is almost unheard of. But I lost because I was running for the wrong reason. We're not running we shouldn't be seeking office looking for people to say you're doing a good job. You shouldn't be seeking office seeking for accolades or awards or for TV cameras.
Well, that's all we see. We see Marilyn Mosby on television. We see the mayor on television. I really wonder, with all due respect, does the mayor do any work at a desk?
Well, remember now, he has the assistants for the first time.
I'll be damn all of that. The mayor, come on now. When you go in your office, I always see you sitting at your desk. That's where work is done.
I don't know that he's not sitting at the desk. I don't know.
Doing what?
I know there's a city administrator who's supposed to be running the city on a day-to-day basis. Who's
and
not
what does
there.
that mean? We've never had one of those, have we?
Not until now, but we
don't even know what that's supposed to look like.
Well, I mean, we've got one. His name is Chris Shorter. I've dealt with him, and on the issues that I've dealt with him, he's been very responsive.
Is he from Baltimore?
Oh, of course not.
So he's got a learning curve.
Well, you know why mayors or elected officials, particularly local elected officials, don't pick people from the local population for their cabinet? Because they're afraid of people.
I don't. Please tell me why.
Because they're afraid of people who may already have loyalties to somebody other than them.
So you get somebody that doesn't know where the bathroom is.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right, Donnie? I mean, on one hand, we're talking about all the institutional and systemic issues in Baltimore and how entrenched it is. There's arguably a benefit to having somebody from outside who doesn't have those, who's not part of that systemic problem, come in to try and help fix it. It has to be the right person. I'm just speaking hypothetically, but you can make the other argument.
So, Mr. Bob, let me ask you: if Sheila were the mayor, would the city be looking like it is right now?
No, but but it wouldn't be looking much better. It wouldn't be looking. It wouldn't be looking much. Because go ahead.
No, that's you got an echo going.
No, I don't think it would be looking much better because real change requires people who have the courage to not just to understand what the problem is, but to tell the truth about what the problem is and the courage to try to fix it. Look, Baltimore City, where the median income is 60% or less of that of the surrounding jurisdictions. Harford County, Howard County, Baltimore County, 60% or less of the median. Donnie, we can't ignore that fact. We cannot ignore. Services cost money. Somebody's got to pay for it. You can't, if you're running for mayor in the city and your mantra is, I'm not going to raise property taxes or I'm going to reduce property taxes, and that's all you're talking about, crime and grime and reduce. Somebody's got to pay. If taxes are the only source of income, because no government adds value. Government is there to provide services, not add value. The government cannot produce money. So go ahead. I can't hear you. I can't hear a word you're saying.
You said the government provides services.
That's what it's supposed to do. Doesn't add value, provide services.
A 69-year-old lady gets stabbed in a church.
Tragic. I knew that lady.
Why hasn't that been solved? A 13-year-old girl gets shot in front of it was a fight in front of Lillian Jones. Witnesses galore. $13,000 reward. And nobody's giving up this person? So we're shooting 13-year-old girls and 69-year-old women. Where are the governmental services? Or do you have to go back and qualify that governmental services if you're not Black?
Well, first of all, you need to start with the truth, and the truth is police don't stop crime. Okay,
I'm talking about solving.
And in 90% of the cases, the only time they solve crime is when they get a tip from somebody who saw it happen.
They had a whole bunch of witnesses.
And the quality of the witnesses varies from case to case. But the fact of the matter is, police don't stop crime, and they only solve crime when somebody tells them who did it. Okay, that's it. So stop running for office saying the police are going to stop crime. They're not. The community is not going to come forward to help the police because they don't know who to trust.
So how would
they don't know where the greatest risk is, with the police or with the guy they saw go home after he stabbed the woman at the church.
Okay, I understand this, but how did Giuliani turn around a bigger, more violent city, and we're not able to do it here in Baltimore?
Well, he did it in two ways. Well, number one, he controlled the statistics. Number two,
it's a lie.
Number two, he did what O'Malley did in Baltimore. He implemented zero tolerance in the Black communities. That's what he did, and he was America's mayor for that.
We have 100% tolerance in Baltimore City now.
No. Well, now you think you're going to bait me into talking about the consent decree, and I'm not going to take that bait. So let's move on.
Come on in, Neil. I think you guys are focusing on the right issue and the wrong race. The mayor's race, or the mayor's position, to me is less significant than the state's attorney position in Baltimore City for the exact reason that we're talking about. It begins and ends with crime. If you want to revitalize Baltimore City, but you don't control in any way the crime rate, if you make proclamations that you're not going to prosecute certain types of crimes, I don't care how much of an investment is made or where that investment comes from, you are never going to be able to extricate the city from the position that it's in now. Because like I was saying earlier, crime is the root of everything. Now, I'm not by any means suggesting that you implement a policy like Rudy Giuliani did in New York, right? That was zero tolerance. It was designed specifically in many ways to be targeted towards the Black community in ways that in many respects I believe to be unconstitutional. But from a bigger picture, here's something that came out of it. You can talk about the statistics, and he manipulated this and he manipulated that. But Times Square, when he took over, right, was considered to be slummy, and people didn't want to go there. It was dangerous. And by the time he was done, Times Square became a thriving tourist attraction again. And what did that do? More money for New York City, right? It generated revenue. His administration was able to take the flagship of the city, Times Square, right, from a tourist point of view, revenue generating, and turn it back into what they wanted it to be. Now, Again, maybe that was based more on perception than statistics, but the reality is, from an economic perspective, it worked. And why did it work? Because people perceived they were safer. And when people feel safer, businesses thrive, communities thrive.
I actually agree with Neil with respect to the issue of the declaration of non-prosecution of crime in the community. And I don't draw a distinction between so-called low-level crime and high-level crime. I think that the crimes that you ought to be focusing on most are those that most people deal with on a daily basis, and that's not murder. That's not murder. That's not home invasion. That's the stuff that happens as they try to traverse the streets, to walk from one block to another, or to walk from their house to get in their car, or to carry groceries from their car to their house. Those are the kinds of crimes that impact people the most. But all the attention is at the top of the scale, so to speak, at the top of the chart. We're focusing on the murders. People would be thrilled if there were only 300 break-ins in their block during the course of a year. They'd be thrilled but so those are the kinds of things. Pardon?
You're muted, Donnie.
Why doesn't the state's attorney see this?
Because first of all, we allowed that position to become a politicized political position.
How did we allow it? All we wanted was the cops that put the knee in Freddie Gray's neck.
It started long before Mosby. It started with Milton Allen, and it started because Milton Allen was the first citywide office that anybody black ever won, and so we made a political hero out of Milton Allen because he was state's attorney. It didn't matter that the only job of the state's attorney was to prosecute. It was a black man in a citywide office. That office became part of the political leadership, if you will, within the black community, and it never should have. It wasn't designed to be. But it's from Milton to Pat Jessamy and Mosby, I think, is the coup de grace of the whole thing when she even had an inaugural ball after she won. Somebody said Jessamy had an inaugural ball too. I don't really remember that one, but
Jessamy started the balls.
She had a political. She had a ball or something, an inaugural ball when after she won the first time.
I kind of recall something like that. I knew she used to have an annual party down over at the Cherry Hill, the rowing club.
Well, yeah, but prosecutors shouldn't be having annual parties. Prosecutors shouldn't be having inaugural balls. Prosecutors shouldn't be going on television trying to make the community feel good.
So has Mosby been propelled by Freddie Gray? At some point, should she have halted the massive media attention she was getting to focus on the job at hand, or did she let it take her away? Neil?
I mean, you know the answer to that question. That's not a real question.
Okay. Is it too late for her to focus on the job at hand?
For her, yes. In my opinion.
And in my opinion, it depends on who runs against her. And
well, right now you got Ivan Bates. He got pimp slapped the first time, and then you also got Roya Hanna.
Yeah. I think the fact that Bates just threw his hat in the ring makes it more likely that she'll seek another term. I think she probably feels like in a one-on-one race that she's disliked enough that in a one-on-one race she's probably going to have an issue. But if somebody else throws their hat in it so that there's multiple people in the anti-Mosby camp, she probably feels like she could still win.
So we have another 4 years of Mosby.
Whether she wins or not, I don't know. But I suspect, if I had to guess right now, the fact that there are more than one, there's more than one person opposing her makes it more likely that she will run. But she's also got other legal issues, right? I mean, she's got potential federal charges looming over her. Robert was talking about things that state's attorneys shouldn't be doing. I'll add one to that list. Theoretically, you shouldn't have your local state's attorney having a campaign to raise money for a legal fund to defend federal criminal charges, right? That's unseemly for a state's attorney whose main charge is to enforce the law.
Right, 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 right. I agree. But remember now, of all the prosecutions that take place, I don't know the statistics, but my guess is that well over 90% result from police arrests and not from grand jury indictment. Right. So I mean, there's essentially two ways that charges are brought. From what I understand about the criminal system, somebody can correct me. I mean, the police either arrest you, or a commissioner issues a criminal summons, or you get indicted by the grand jury. I mean, there may be other ways, but I don't know them. But of those three methods, I venture to say 90% of prosecutions are derived from police arrest. So in the final analysis, the decision on who to prosecute or what to prosecute for is made before it even reaches the prosecutor's office.
I'll tell you a name that we've not heard anything from in the past couple of weeks, and that's Isabel Cumming. What happened to her, Mr. Bob? Last I remember, there was an issue about her.
As far as I know, Isabel is there and doing well. I mean, that she's got a little bit of a feud, I think, going on between her and the city solicitor about how open her evaluation should be. I mean, they're both taking sort of an odd position on that. I mean, the city solicitor seems to say that we won't make part of the evaluation public, even though the reason for keeping it private is to protect the incumbent. When the incumbent says, make it as public as you want, I'd rather have it that way. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on there, but, you know, there's too much politics involved in all of those positions. And ultimately that means that we need to take a much closer look at the people who are holding those jobs.
So we have a governor's race coming up. How do we apply all of these lessons that you gentlemen have so graciously bestowed upon us today? What not to do, what to expect, what not to expect. Who then do we like to be the next governor of Maryland?
Bob, you go. I'll listen.
The kind of candidate that I mean, I'm not sure the person that I ultimately like is even in the race, to be honest with you, because the person who's in the race, who ought to be in the race, is one who's willing to tell the truth even at the risk of losing. And I'm not sure that person is in the race. I'm convinced that everybody in the race has the primary goal to win, and
by any means necessary.
By any means necessary, unfortunately. And that's what I believe. But that's the name of the game as the rules have evolved over the years. As I tell you, you know, as you said, smart people don't run. Unfortunately, it's come to the point where good people don't run either. And the absence of smart people and good people from the list of candidates means the system itself can't ever get so much better than what it is now.
Come on, Neil.
I actually think you know, from a bigger picture point of view, because I don't know that I necessarily see the prime candidate in the race. But one of the things that I'm grateful for is the fact that because Maryland, while it is a heavily blue state, has a history of electing Republican governors. This is not one of those states where the Democratic primary is in effect the general election. And so it acts as, no pun intended, a governor on some of the candidates as they're campaigning against each other in the primary, because they know that they have a competitive general election ahead of them in most years. And so I think what you will hopefully see from the candidates as the campaign starts to heat up before the primary is, you know, genuine differences between them articulated in a way that allows us to make the right choice for who we think the right candidate should be, you know, going to the next election. But I think we're just starting that process right now. I don't think anybody's really, I think this is like the first round of a boxing fight where the two fighters are sort of circling each other in the ring without really landing any blows.
Oh, come on, Neil. You know who's going to win this election.
The general election?
Both of you guys already know, you've studied politics, both locally, nationally, internationally. You know who's going to win.
I don't.
Well, I'm going to say this, Donnie. I'm doing everything I can to promote the candidacy of Wes Moore. I'll say that publicly, but I say that today with the following caveat. It depends, and I've said that to him. He's got to get the right people. He's got to select the right people to be part of the campaign. And if he should be successful, he's got to get the right people as part of his candidate, as part of his cabinet. Now, who do I think has got you? Who do I think has got the best chance at this point? If you go by traditional yardsticks, and then you've got to say Francho. He's got more money than anybody. He still has more name recognition, I think, than probably anybody. And he's been certainly running longer than anybody. He's been running for at least the last 20 years. So I mean, it's a smart money, if you will.
But what are the negatives? Give us the negatives to a Peter Francho.
I don't trust him. I've had situations where where he's always said things that I thought were appeasing and favorable, but he always ends up doing something just the opposite. And so, and I think that
where we grew up, Mr. Bob, in all my time knowing you, you remind me of my daddy, in that a man is only as good as his word. Neil, were you raised like that? That your word is all you've got?
100%.
Can't break your word. It's how do you come back when you broke your word? I'm not Francho. I'm looking at myself. If I say I'm going to do something and I don't do it, then I'm creating my own storyline. His word's no good, and nobody wants to deal with you after that.
To me, the problem with Francho, I mean, Donnie, I obviously you're right. I just wish more voters cared about that as much as you do, and generally speaking, they don't. But to me, the problem with a guy like Peter Francho is his strengths are also his weaknesses. He's likely to be the nominee because he's so entrenched and because he's raised the most money, because he has the most connections, but it also makes him very institutionalist, which means that in a general election, there's not going to be the same, groundswell of support. You're not going to see the enthusiasm for somebody like him than you would see for somebody like Wes Moore, who's young, more energetic, who's going to captivate people more. And I think we all assume Kelly Schultz is going to be the Republican nominee. I don't see Dan Cox as being particularly viable. That's going to matter in a general election. If you perceive Schultz as being an extension of a third Hogan term, right, then that makes her a very viable general election candidate. And if a guy like Francho is the nominee and it depresses the base, meaning the people are just not enthusiastic about him, that's
I think it actually leaves the door open for Michael Steele.
Why would you want to do that?
Why would you want a Kelly Schultz?
I wouldn't.
No, and don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that I would vote for her. I'm just saying, if you ask me to handicap the race, a guy like Francho is very just uninspiring.
No, I think it's not. They're saying some things about Peter Francho down in Prince George's County, and where there's smoke, there's fire. For instance, when he went to the Black Caucus Forum on the Black Agenda, when asked what his Black Agenda was, Mr. Bob, he told the people in the audience to go to his website. Anything you want to know about my Black Agenda, go to my website. And then he left the forum early, said his wife was sick. That's what I think of you black people.
Lip service, right?
Slave owner.
And what do you do with the black people who think the same way?
Throw them in the same harbor.
And unfortunately, unfortunately, those are the ones among us that seem that are willing to throw their hats in the ring and seek political office. The same, that who think exactly the same way. And we've got to get, just like I say, we got to get to the point where party affiliation should make no difference. And in the final analysis, neither does because as you say, Donnie, all skin, not kin. So I'm not prepared. I'm not willing to say, well, because you look like me, that you are like me. No, I'm more inclined to determine who you are by where you, not by what comes out of your mouth or your head, but what I detect to be coming from your heart. And the answer is ultimately more people like us, you, Donnie, particularly, got to run for office, or at least you got to help create a
I thought
mechanism.
you love me, man.
At least you have. That's why I chastise you.
I thought you love me.
We've at least got to create a mechanism, Donnie, to identify, promote, and nurture the people who we want to hold. We've got to create our own Manchurian candidate, if you will. We've got to create a school for Manchurian candidates. But we've got to create a mechanism to teach Manchurian. There's nothing wrong with being a Manchurian candidate as long as you're a candidate for the right reasons to do the right things.
It's a dirty game, Mr. Bob. The political game is dirtier than the dope game because it controls the dope game, the criminal game, the war game, the food game, the Green Planet game.
It's like Bob was saying earlier. Who decides who decides, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Dirty game. And this is a dirty city. Look at Bob Clay. Bob Clay got out there and was politically active. Next thing you know, this wealthy black man who was right-handed,
yeah,
was found dead with a bullet hole in the left side of his head, and he was right-handed, and they called it suicide. Nah, I don't trust these people at all. Mob town. Look at Detective Suter. Do you believe Detective Suter from Washington, D.C.? Now, Neil, you may not understand the nuances, but a black man from D.C. is not going to commit suicide in a filthy West Baltimore alley, not when he got a wife and 5 beautiful kids at home. Am I wrong, Mr. Bob?
Oh, I don't think Suter committed suicide, and I don't think Bob Clay committed suicide. But Bob and I were close for many, many years. But the consequence of Bob's political involvement are still with us. Senator Jill Carter, politically, was very much a creation of Bob Clay in terms of his support for her in the House of Delegates, and ultimately, even now, that position put her in a place where she could get the office that she now holds. So Clay's impact on Baltimore City politics and Maryland politics has not been totally lost, and didn't end with the bullet hole to his head. But no, I don't think he committed suicide. And I don't think Suter committed suicide. But I'm looking to see what's the point that you're making between that and who's holding political office. What's the connection?
That it's cruddy. It's the cruddiest game.
Oh,
and just like in the dope game, they'll kill you. In the political game, they killed Bob Clay. They killed Sean Suter. And no, I don't trust none of them.
So how do you fix it, Donnie?
We keep having these discussions, and maybe we pray. No, we pray, and maybe somehow the light bulb will go off. But it's a very dirty game. Mm-hmm. And those who want to do good obviously have a tough time. This is a city that can't even fix vacant houses. We've been talking about them too long. They're taking seniors' houses for water bills. The Ritz-Carlton got a $2 million water bill. Nobody's taking their property. But Miss Ann up the street, they taking her house. Black people. And Neil, this is something you may or may not understand. It's a classism within the black community. Do you get that part?
I do, very much so.
How
so? Tell me about the classism you see.
I think there's a perception, that there's a hierarchy even within the black community in Baltimore City and across the state. And I think there's it's going to be a terrible analogy, almost like the Clarence Thomas syndrome, right? Where you're not, I'm better than you. You're not, I'm going to be dismissive.
You're not black enough.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the perception, right? I mean, so when you talk about classism within the black community, that's what I think of is this idea that we might be black, but that's the only thing we share in common because I'm better than you.
Mr. Bob,
and it's very dangerous.
will Wes have that challenge coming across as too accomplished?
I don't think it's a question of being too accomplished. I think you've got to identify truthfully issues that that inspire people, that excite people, particularly Black people. I think that for West to win, he's got to get upwards of 80% of the Black vote. That means he's got to convince a bunch of Black folk who probably otherwise wouldn't vote because there's no excitement around the election to come out and vote, and he's got to convince them to vote for him. And he can't remake who he is. So the only way to measure or to predict his success from the point of view of Black folk is to look at the people that he brings in to surround him. And when Wes came to my office many weeks ago, before he even started talking, I said, "Look, there are three things that I want you to know that do not impress me, and I don't think will impress most Black folk. One, your tour of duty in Afghanistan. I don't think we should have been there in the first place. So I'm not impressed with that. Two, your Rhodes Scholarship. I'm not impressed with any scholarships given by Cecil Rhodes from South Africa, who was a colonialist at best and other things at worst. And three, I'm not impressed with your running of Robin Hood, a $1 billion nonprofit organization that paid you $800,000 a year, and everybody on your board was a billionaire, a white male billionaire for the most part. So put those three things aside and explain to me why we should support you as governor." And he said, look, and his response was, "Because I'm committed to what you believe in." I said, "Okay, well then you got to show me that. You got to show me that show me who you are selecting to be, because he has the credentials. Don't get me wrong. If you look at Westmore's credentials, if you look at Kirk Smoke's credentials, if you look at Obama's credentials, they all cut from the same cloth. But unless West is going to be different than those two, he's going to be as worthless as those two, to me. So you got to pick people. He can't be somebody other than who he is, and I don't want him to be that. But he can pick people, hopefully people who I think believe what I believe, and around him, and to provide some guidance and support. And as of the moment, he's told me that that's what he intends to do, and I see it. It's not easy. It's not easy because it runs against the grain. Donnie, we have been taught as a people to do exactly what people do who we say are our oppressors. We flee Baltimore City just like everybody else. We don't want to live in Sandtown any more than anybody else. And the first chance we get, we're going to get the hell out of there. The only reason you did still that because you can't afford to move.
I can move. Okay. I could have moved some time ago.
I don't mean that literally, but I'm just saying.
No, I was moving straight to Atlanta.
But probably to a place in Atlanta that looked a lot like Sandtown. Because
I was actually thinking of Decula, Georgia. It's about 45 minutes outside of Atlanta. Very tall trees.
But my point is, Donnie, that we have been taught, the culture teaches us to avoid contact with Black folk. Because
that's my problem. See, I tried living out there in Randallstown with you, but it was too quiet.
Well, it's a whole lot of y'all moved out here with me. I thought I was getting away from you. Now I look down Liberty Road and I don't see nothing but colored people.
And they can't drive out Liberty Road.
That's for sure.
They cannot drive.
That is for sure. But Donnie, in all seriousness, who decides? We've got to get more people, good people, smart people, committed people to run for these offices. We've got to get rid of the arbitrary restrictions and limitations that impede our ability to select. We got to get rid of the closed primaries. We got to get rid of the predominant so-called two-party system. We got to get rid of the so-called electoral college. We've got to make the brand of democracy in this country look like what it is in other places who we call democratic. This is the only democracy where you don't have to have a coalition to govern. The only one in the world.
Neil, I got to ask you about Anthony Brown. Do you think it's wise for him to leave Congress, to step out there into the Attorney General's race, and then less than 48 hours after he announced, his former political partner, the wife of his former political partner for 8 years, Judge Katie O'Malley, her dad was the former attorney general. She steps out there and said, Anthony, I know Martin was your man's in them, but it's me and you, baby. Me and you, baby.
What, what a coincidence, right?
What a backhand pimp slap. Boy, get back in your place.
What are the odds of that? Wow.
O'Malley was saying, I'm not going to fight you. I'm going to send my woman out there to dust you.
No love lost between the Brown and O'Malley camps. That's for sure.
What happened?
I mean, I don't know what happened. My best sense, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, is that I think O'Malley
I sat beside you for 8 years.
Yeah, but I think O'Malley was upset by the fact that Brown didn't embrace him as closely as O'Malley would have liked in that first election against Governor Hogan, and I think O'Malley was probably annoyed. O'Malley's, my understanding, a very narcissistic person, like most politicians, and didn't like the fact that Anthony Brown wasn't sufficiently deferential to the quote-unquote joint accomplishments.
White people have mental illness too now. Black people ain't the only one with mental illness.
Oh, I hear you. So if you say to me what happened, I'm sure there's other stuff too, right? It's never as simple as just one thing. But overlaying everything, I think there was a sense that had Brown run
makes
closer
Brown
to
look
O'Malley,
like a rookie. Doesn't it make Brown look like a rookie?
Yeah, and to answer your original question, should he be leaving his seat in Congress to run for Attorney General? To me, the only way that makes sense is if he sees Attorney General as a springboard to having another gubernatorial run.
Otherwise, stay where you're at.
Otherwise, stay where you're at. I mean, that's as safe a seat as you're going to have. Maybe one day, if you spend enough time as a member of Congress, one of the Senate seats opens up, and depending on what the landscape looks like, maybe you get a shot to move up the chain.
Stop. This is Maryland. We're not having any black U.S. senators. The white people have spoken.
I hope you're wrong about that.
Who's in line? Kwesi was dismissed. Senator Moose was dismissed. Michael Steele was dismissed.
And all for good cause. What makes you? Why should Anthony Brown be the Attorney General of Maryland? I forget who he's running against. Say he's running.
Why should Cardin be the U.S. senator?
Pardon?
Why should Van Hollen be the U.S. senator? Baltimore County has only had white male executives.
Yeah, but this white male executive appointed the only black county administrator, the only black head of the Department of Public Works, the only black head of the Department of Economic Development, and kept the only black head of the Department of Health. And
Cabinet's got rid of your Office of Black Business, and we thought he was going to be the next governor till they found him.
Who's that?
Kevin Cabinet. He probably was going to be the next governor.
Yeah, I would. No, he would have had a decent shot at it anyway.
I think he would have given Hogan a really, really good run for his money in the second race.
The truth would have come out about him, and I'll leave well enough alone.
Donnie, as you guys are talking, one of the things that jumps out at me that is sort of a frustration. And Donnie, I've heard you articulate this before, is this idea that the black voting bloc is monolithic, right? That there's a way to quote unquote get the black vote. And this is something that the Democratic Party has succumbed to over generations now. This idea that, you just have this loyal bloc, and there are certain issues that resonate with black voters, quote unquote. And the reality is, I think black voters are voters who care about the same issues that anybody else does. Crime, things within their local communities. How do you improve my life? How do you add the value that Robert was talking about? How do you provide the services? Not the value, but the services that improve my life. Right now in Baltimore City, that's a different conversation than, some other areas of the state, but the principle is the same. And if you can find the right candidate, and to me, it starts in the state's attorney's office. Find the candidate who's going to say, I don't care who you are. We're prosecuting all crime because it is important for people in this community to understand that all crime will be prosecuted. And maybe where that leads to a reduction in crime isn't in the deterrence part, right? You start actually prosecuting some of the property crime, and you will see a reduction. You're not going to eliminate it. You're never going to eliminate it. But you will see a reduction based on deterrence. And if you see that, that can be a stepping stone to something better. Businesses feel more secure. They're able to generate more revenue. They hire more people. Businesses grow. I know it's a pipe dream, and I probably sound like I'm being overly optimistic about it, but to me, it all starts there.
Folks, that's all we have time for today. Mr. Bob, did you want to respond before we close out?
No, I've already said I agree that in our community, the crimes that not ought to be prosecuted are the ones that are being committed.
Okay.
Period.
I'd like to see somebody come out of Baltimore City Public School headquarters in handcuffs. Our children are being robbed. 60 is passing. Icicles on the classroom. No AC in the warmer months. Something is fundamentally wrong. $16,000 per student, and yet we're producing an inferior product.
Let's save that for another day. I agree with you.
I agree with that too.
Have a beautiful day. We'll be back tonight at 6 p.m. with Shared Spaces with Chap. Mr. Bob, Neil Dubowski, we appreciate you much.
Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Bob. Good to see you guys.
See you guys.
Good morning, world.